I'm wearing my hat and my coat. I just was so excited to talk about this that I didn't even get myself situated properly for being home. All right. Oh dear. Completely missed an entire couch. So I just got back from seeing the part one of Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie. And this is also after I have just finished my, I don't know, fourth or fifth reread of said novel of source material. I've read the original Dune, yeah, like 4 or 5 times, and the first two sequels. So, books 2 and 3, I've only read once. But the original I have read, yes, several times. It's one of those books that I am genuinely just sort of mad at myself, like I didn't start reading earlier. I was full on adult. I don't remember when I first read it. I don't remember when I first read it. But I've read it multiple times since. That and the Silmarillion are probably the two sort of books that I'm most sort of like, hey, I should have read this when I was younger, and have since read it multiple times. But so I read it again because I wanted to be super book nerd fresh for watching the movie that came out. And it is only part one. I don't know if they're trying to go with 2 or 3 parts. Either one would work, quite frankly, 2 or 3 movies. I'm guessing maybe only 2, given the where they sort of left off after this first part of the movie. So a couple things I just kind of want to get into. I'm trying to do much better at keeping some of these review things a little bit more concise, a little bit shorter, a little bit, nicer towards, the actual people listening to things as opposed to just me rambling on for God knows how long, just to ramble kind of thing. First and foremost, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed seeing it in a cinema or a theater, and I think part of the thing, it's almost a little necessary to do that, considering the scope and grandeur of the movie. The story is anyway, but seeing it in a sort of cinema setting is very nice because the way it's filmed, the sets and everything, and there's a huge grandiosity to it. Both the Atreides and the Harkonnen homes, and then when they start getting onto Arrakis, and all the nature stuff, whether it's on Caladan or Arrakis, are huge, and I think you're supposed to get the sense of this sort of grandiosity of it, of the sort of their place in the universe of it and everything else like that. There's symbolism with the space that's being used, not only in terms of the book but also in terms of the movie. And seeing it in a theater, in a cinema, is sort of a very nice way to be able to sort of start experiencing that. And then when they start getting into not start getting into, but when you're especially, it was almost especially visceral with the sandworms, with the shahulut, because the way the sound was, and then you're never going to get really the scope of how big these things are supposed to be, especially the ones that Paul is exposed to. But seeing it in this is probably the closest you're going to get to that. And then the way they had the sound, you could kind of feel it and everything too. So there was a real sort of sensory experience with that. So if you get a chance to see it in the theater, definitely do that thing. because I think it will be good for you. There's going to be spoilers to this. Um, you know, uh, the book's been out for over 50 something years. There's, David Lynch's movie in the 80s. There was a sort of, I think it was a Sci-Fi Channel original a limited series, what, 90s or something like that, too. So there's the source material's been around for a while, and it's super famous and popular. I think it's supposed to be like the best-selling or, you know, highest example of sort of science fiction literature that there is. So there is, it's definitely been out there. So while yes, there's spoilers, to a certain extent, they're, a lot of it's probably already kind of been for most people anyway. Um, so, but yeah, so overall, really well done, really well done. Major sense of the scope and grandiosity of it. You get a really nice sort of, you get the trees and the water and everything from Caladan. You get the oppressive sort of post-industrial, coldness of Gede Prime with the Harkonnens, and then the huge desert emptiness of Arrakis you kind of get to. And when you're in the city of Arrakeen, there's almost a manufactured sort of look that almost has a similar sort of Dune quality to it, and has that a harsh angled pyramidal kind of thing to it too. It's a little different than I imagined it, but I think it makes sense. One of the things I have to say that is that my imagination, just reading the book, not even bringing in the other film things, but just from reading the book, probably the thing that was most accurate between, I just shouldn't say accurate, but was most the same between my own imagination and the movie, were the ornithopters, the sort of helicopters, but with dragonfly sort of wings, sort of thing. Those are pretty much exactly as I had imagined them. Maybe not quite as much with the way the legs extended out to land and everything, but other than that, it was pretty accurate. There were a lot of other things that kind of didn't have the exact same kind of feel or look to them as I thought. But I understand what was done and why, and all that. So it makes sense. And even when you get onto Arrakis in the city of Arrakeen, it's not quite the way I thought that they described the house, the sort of palatial complex that the Atreides get to take in of. But I understand having it be some of the open and the sort of concrete sort of thing that would kind of make sense in terms of trying to keep everything cool and sort of be able to adapt to the harsh aridness of it. There were some stuff that was cut that I do kind of understand was cut. I was wondering what they were going to do with the whole dinner scene after they got onto Arrakis, and feeling there's some characters that were cut. The one smuggler, Tuek, the elder Tuek, was cut, and I kind of understand that. You didn't get in with the Fenrings, which if I remember, I'll describe why I think that might be completely cut out too. But I was kind of looking forward to that because it would have been interesting to see everyone interact the way that they would interact, and I like that scene in the book. But that was cut totally. Again, I understand there's time factors to this. Even if you have 3 movies, there's still time factors, and trying to make sure everything kind of fits in with a flow of it, and how you want to divide the either 2 or 3 movies. So I understand that nothing's going to be a direct, perfect book to screen adaptation. I understand that. But But then at saying that as well, like it would be kind of nice to see some stuff. So there were some things that were absolutely directly flat out from the book that was cool. It was really nice to see. I do have a couple problems. I just want to get these out of the way now. One, at no point did they ever have Paul say anything about like his terrible purpose. They didn't use that exact phrase. And I think it repeats itself enough in the book that it was a necessary phrase to have in the movie. And they might have it in however ever many parts that they do, but they needed to have it in the beginning. There was enough about his Paul's prescience and visions and all this other stuff, and then him getting into the idea of the calling him the Lisan al Gaib, that sort of Messiah sort of idea, the Kwisatz Haderach from the Bene Gesserit, this sort of one that has this destiny and this terrible purpose, and he was getting the visions of the sort of universal jihad that was going to be taken up under his name, but they never used that phrase, and it's sort of like, no, you kind of should have used that phrase. That might be really nitpicky book nerd, but it seemed almost to have a certain sort of part and parcel thing to Paul and with that. So that needed to be done. I did not see at all the way they set up Dr. Yue enough where his being the traitor really was anything at all. They showed him a couple times tending to Paul or tending to someone, and then all of a sudden, yeah, he's the traitor. And they did the thing with putting the false tooth into Leto's mouth to try and have him kill the Baron. They talked about, I'm doing this to try and make sure that I know what happens to my wife Juana, but they never got into how important it is that this guy was the traitor. They never got into, they had the diamond on his forehead that has a Sook school conditioning. They never once ever talked about how it should be absolutely impossible to break that. But they did. The Harkonnens did, and that should have been something. It should have been something where they needed to have at least, maybe not the entire scene again for runtime, but they needed to have some sort of addition of the scene between Dr. Yue and Jessica before Paul breaks the sort of little assassin droid sent to kill him. They needed to have that in there to show how much this guy hates the Harkonnens, and to show that he's got some Bene Gesserit sort of juju in there from his wife, and to show and at least be able to bring in the idea that his Sook school conditioning should have made it impossible for him to be compromised. There was no drama, there was no real anything in terms of Yue being a traitor. It was really speed run through. So that whole thing, like with the Goblet of Fire movie for Harry Potter, it's just basically hitting these cliff notes, these real sort of really surface level points of things, being able to call him Dr. Yue like traitor to his face and see him kind of viscerally react to that's a problem. Had no meaning whatsoever, because none of the rest of it was set up in order for that to have meaning. So that I think they really, really dropped the ball on that, because otherwise there's just sort of, oh yeah, this guy's the doctor, and oh, he's a traitor. Oh, he's got a wife that this is going to help. Okay, this means nothing to me, because it's as far as you know, it almost just sort of seems like, oh, there's this guy that was just here, and then he's sort of off the street problem. I mean, it's basically almost sort of like it was almost a totally random person. doing all these things, that just a totally random person that happened to have access to the entire system and could drop the shields and um, kill shadow mapes and was in a position to help Paul and Jessica. They actually made more of a point of trying to show that Dr. Yue helped Paul and Jessica than they did him why his being a traitor was a problem. Or was not even a problem. Obviously, having a traitor is a problem, but why his being a traitor was seen as almost impossible. I don't know if they're in the later movies are going to set up Thufir Hawat having a problem with Jessica and thinking she was the traitor. If they do, they absolutely set nothing of that up in this at all. Again, I understand runtime, and I'm trying to reserve any sort of judgment or any sort of observation because we don't know how this sort of film package is going to unwrap just yet. I don't know how much of that's going to happen. But the whole thing where, okay, well, we're going to have a traitor and who could it be, was completely cut out. Now a part of me really hopes that there's some sort of like Lord of the Rings extended edition of this comes in, where it's going to be like 4 hours and a bunch of this stuff's going to get put back in and it's going to be easier and make more sense. Yeah. So if, was it 20 years ago or whatever, when Fellowship of the Rings came out, I had not read yet Tolkien. So when I saw Fellowship of the Rings, I could think of, fuck me, there's a lot of walking and there's a wizard that doesn't do magic. Some stuff was pretty cool, but the hell. And it took my one friend JP, whom was later one of my roommates and everything, was describing, okay, well, no, first of all, wizards are like these sort of second tier of gods. And then, a lot of this other stuff makes sense. So when he got the extended edition, I watched the extended edition. A lot of stuff made sense, and that turned me over towards the Lord of the Rings. And now Tolkien is like this huge, major sort of thing, and I absolutely love it. And Silmarillion is one of the all-time favorite books of mine and everything. So I kind of hope they have this for Dune, these Dune movies, because it kind of needs it. Again, it's a really dense, even if you just do the one book, it's a really dense book. There is so much in it that it is kind of hard to try and make it just movies and not like a series. You almost do need a Game of Thrones sort of in-depth television series for this instead of movies. You almost really do need to have, like some sort of Amazon Prime, HBO level big time series to be able to really get into everything of Dune, because it's got everything. And one of the things this movie is lacking is the political part of it. There's almost none of the political stuff. It's real the surface. Okay, the Emperor is helping the Harkonnens get rid of it because the Harkonnens hate the Atreides, and the Emperor is worried about the Atreides getting too much power, so he's kind of helping the Harkonnens and undercut it. The whole thing with the Emperor's troops just blatantly being out there as the Sardaukar, as opposed to having any point whatsoever that they were disguised as Harkonnen troops, that wasn't in there at all. Not having the dinner in there takes out a lot of the political stuff. And the some of the conversations with Baron Harkonnen, a couple of them, no political stuff whatsoever. Basically the scheming and blatantly obvious this person is a horrible person. We can't do anything with him. He's just a horrible thing, and he needs to just be super gross and awful. And okay, you set up your villain in the most villainy ways, but there was all these, even in the books, they talk about not only in the political intrigue, but also in like the getting down into the hand-to-hand combat. There's feints within feints within feints. And there's none of that in here. None. So a lot of the sophistication of the story, a lot of the sophistication of all the underlying stuff going on into this so far really isn't there, and it might have been set up for now the second movie is really going to get it in depth with some of that. Some of the religious spiritual stuff was touched on a little bit more, which is good, because I think as much as I'm not really a big political person, but as much as the political sort of machination stuff is interesting in Dune, it's really the sort of the spiritual levels, the whole questioning of consciousness, and the sort of psychic revelation, and that sort of evolved mental spiritual human sort of thing is really what kind of draws me in a little bit more, because that's the weird stuff that I like anyway. That got put into it a little bit. The whole thing with the Gom Jabbar, I think, was handled really well. Having him kind of come out of it and like stare down the Reverend Mother Helen Gaius Mohayim with that was really well done, and kind of freaked her out with it, and having her kind of be, they almost sort of the Bene Gesserit that they showed almost sort of look like the Sith, the Sith acolytes in was it The Rise of Skywalker or something like that, but like not stupid. God, I really hated Rise of Skywalker. But they did a good job making them seem like religious and powerful and creepy and apart. And in the book, there's some parts where, well, you know what? It's kind of hard to say that, because again, they haven't gotten into some of this stuff later on, but they are building in, at least built in, some of the conflict between Paul and his mother Jessica, because he's realized that she is kind of, his whole sort of existence was pointing to these certain things. Kwisatz Haderach, this sort of almost messiah kind of figure, and she has not only played a passive and active role into creating him into doing that, training a male in a Bene Gesserit way, because they're all women, is a sort of oddity anyway. So his whole thing is he's gotten a certain amount of this insight and everything from this training. He's almost been set up to have this terrible purpose that they never talked about, to have this odd fate, to have all this stuff happen. And it's almost a sort of direct, not almost, but it is, in direct sort of, in a direct line from his mother's decisions. And I am not at all saying that Jessica is a villainous person whatsoever. I fucking love Lady Jessica. I think she's an awesome character, and I think that, given the choices that she had, she made, the right ones. She was supposed to give Duke Leto, sorry, a girl, but she decided, because she literally did actually love the Duke, instead of just being, a Bene Gesserit sort of pawn and purpose for their scheming. Did kind of what he kind of wanted a son, which makes sense, especially with someone who sort of needs a certain heir for their thing, and she didn't want to just be, just what someone else was going to say to do. And yeah, maybe there was some ego with her in that as well, because she wanted to have, she'd think that, okay, maybe there is an instinct to her own purpose, that this thing could have happened, this Kwisatz Haderach could have happened through her. And that might be ego with her, but I think it was also, an instinct and a purpose with her as well. And she's a badass in her own right. She's a badass in her own right, not only physically, and she bested Stilgar, which was, the guy got to be the leader of his Setch. I kept thinking, I want to say Sietch, because it's like Sietch, I think it is how it's spelled, but they kept saying Setch in the book or in the movie, or Sietch or something like that. And it's one of those disparities between having read a thing and then hearing the way it's supposed to be said, and it's a weird, it's a bad disparity for me because almost I can't even hear right the Setch or Sietch that they said in the movie because I kept thinking Sietch, because there's so many things in languages that are different than English, where kind of everything is pronounced in a certain way, and that's kind of what I was going for when I read it. Excuse me. Oh boy. And they're saying it differently than I heard it. I'm having a problem getting that in, especially since I again just reread the book. So, but yeah, but she's even brilliant in terms of talking. Again, they didn't have the scene between her and Thufir Hawat about him thinking that they know there's a traitor in their midst, and they were like, man, well, if it's not you, it's not Duncan, it's not Duncan Idaho, it's not going to be Thufir Hawat, it's not going to be Gurney Halleck, it's not Paul, well, it's got to be Jessica. Well, it can't be Jessica's like, it's not me. And they're like, well, the only other person is really Dr. Yue, and it's obviously not him because, of his Sook School conditioning. But the whole thing, there's multiple times where Jessica does such an amazing job talking through things and setting things up and knocking them down. And she's a badass with her words as well as with, her religious aspect, with her observations of situations, and then, yeah, just beating dudes down. So I love Jessica as a character, and obviously, like, let's get into, let me put this in and I'll come back to it, but the movie was cast very well. Rebecca Ferguson does an amazing job as Jessica. But without some of the political stuff and everything, it's a little bit hard to kind of really get the full thing of her character. And that's unfortunate. I feel like I maybe lost my train of thought a little bit with this, but I'm going to go on because okay, where I'm sorry, that really messed me up. Okay, I remember where I was going to go. My biggest problem, my biggest problem, and this ties into the not really having the political part of the story really shown as much, is that with Baron Harkonnen, he has two nephews. One is Rabban, or Rabban, and the other one is Feyd-Rautha. Now, Rabban was the person kind of titularly in charge of Arrakis before the Emperor gave it to the Atreides to set them up for failure and to die. And the Baron Harkonnen, Vladimir Harkonnen, knew, and Rabban's kind of like he's monstrous. And his whole thing is he was going to put Rabban back into power to be even more monstrous and set him up to fail now so he can put the heir that he wanted, this other nephew, Feyd-Rautha, in there. And if I remember correctly, that was Sting's character in David Lynch's version. Now, Feyd-Rautha was the one that the Bene Gesserit they were going to try and do, is have him then have kids with what was supposed to be Jessica and Duke Leto's daughter. Jessica was supposed to give them a daughter, not a son, and then they were going to take because the Bene Gesserit's been, guiding all these bloodlines for their own purpose, kind of thing, for thousands of years, and the potential Kwisatz Haderach was going to be the union between Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen and the daughter that was supposed to be the Atreides. and that was going to be the possible. Now, one of the people that so far they cut, this Count Fenring, who's like the best friend of the Emperor, was also a potential Kwisatz Haderach. He's a little bit older, but he had some sort of genetic things. And but since Paul's a boy, they can't really do that. But Feyd-Rautha is a cruel sort of psychopath in his own right, and he's a Harkonnen and everything. But also feints within feints within feints. Paul can fight very well. Feyd-Rautha's got a lot of fighting prowess in with it. He's been bred to be, Baron Harkonnen's heir and take over, and the Baron was trying to teach him how to do, run the things the way he does. Duke Leto Atreides has Paul and brings him in on conversations and war councils and is training him to be his heir after that. So there is a direct parallel between Paul Atreides, later known as Usul and Muad'Dib, and Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen. They keep saying Harkonnen in there, and I don't like the way they say that either. So there's this direct parallel between the two. So far in the movie, there is only Raban, no Feyd-Rautha. I have a distinct and just sort of really core of myself book nerd problem with this. Especially since they clearly have had no problem in this movie with symbolism. If we're going to talk about, there's all this consciousness and spiritual sort of thing, and they even literally have ships coming out of the water on Caladan that's going to transport them to Arrakis. Now, so out of the subconscious, that's literally what like water's meaning in a lot of these things, is the subconscious, this hidden thing, this primordial thing that is coming forth and coming out, and is going to lead them down this sort of path into. It's a little technical problem there. So it's going to literally lead them to this path into like their fate, and then making these decisions, and then using that subconscious stuff to then evolve. So they have no problem with that. They kept, the hand of Paul that went in the Gom Jabbar, also went into the water, and then later went into the sand, and he saw it almost on fire. So these primordial elemental forces, they're using the symbolism of that, which, by the way, is to the movie's credit. Because yes, in a adaptation like this, in source material like this, having these sort of primordial elemental qualities and the symbolism involved with that, coming out of the subconscious, go birth through fire, having that spirit come out, and then being part of this environment that sort of strips things down and really forces you to be very certain way. A very like all it's almost like the most sort of samurai thing. Like everything else is stripped away. It's like, what's survival? What's this? This is the way we live and survive. That's it. Stripping all this other stuff away. And his going from one kind of thing to another, and evolving through that. So he's got no problem with symbolism, which is great for me. I love symbolism. Symbolism is cool. This is one of the things where the original Dune movie, the David Lynch's one, was obviously hamstringed from having Dino De Laurentiis take final cut of the edit of it. And that's why, David Lynch now is like, screw you, I get final cut or I'm not doing it. And I really think that, Dino De Laurentiis, in the grand tradition of producers sticking their goddamn nose into things they have no business sticking into,
Thank you. Also, the Weinsteins were very huge into that. Many, many, many projects and movies have been diminished greatly by those assholes sticking their piece of shit faces into things where they don't belong. Um, so it's really these people need to get out of the way. And Alejandro Jodorowsky was supposed to do a version of Dune, which I still really want to see. Oh my God, how amazing would that be? And again, that's going to be like a symbolist, wet dream sort of thing for that. And Dennis Villeneuve has symbolism in it, and it's very well done because it's not sort of like it's almost it almost could just be more atmospheric. Where if you want to see the symbolism, you can see the symbolism in it. If you want to just have a sort of atmospheric theater movie experience, it can be that too. So there's almost a sort of literalism, but there's still that symbol symbology sort of thing with it too. So it's really well done. But he has that. So I don't understand why there isn't this symbolism of the parallel of Paul. His opposite number, the thing he could have been possibly. This sort of shadow self, his Moriarty, and everything with that. And I don't know if they're trying to set up Raban to be that because Raban's much older. He's already been shown to be, yeah, the Beast Raban. That's what they called him. This sort of nickname with that. He's already been shown to be this beast. So there's not really a parallel between Raban and Paul, either in the book or really in the movie. And I really feel that, symbolically speaking, at the very least, not having Feyd-Rautha in this is a huge mistake. Because when Paul's going to confront him, because spoiler alert, again, the book's been out for a while, and spoiler alert, a villain, you know, oh, this villain's set up. I wonder if the hero is going to defeat them. Come on. But having him then defeat Feyd-Rautha, his shadow, his like really ugly shadow, especially, Feyd-Rautha, they have the whole thing in the book with him going off and basically just banging, um, uh, slaves and stuff like that. Paul is very committed to Chani, which I kept thinking, I wanted to say Chani, is the way, again, the way I had it, because it's CH, and I kept saying Chani, but it's Chani, I guess, the way they're saying it in the movie. Zendaya's character. And, um, he's he's very committed to her. And even towards the end, when he's trying to make these political connections and stuff like that, he still stays very loyal to Chani. So again, you have these very opposite parallels, these sort of polar opposites with that I think is necessary for the symbolism of Paul and his messianic sort of fate and everything else that goes on. You need to have him defeat that shadow version of himself in order for really the impact of everything that's going on, the religious impact of it, as well as just the individual personal journey, let alone a sort of mid symbol, not mid symbolism, but I guess a sort of middle range symbolism of like the hero journey. You have to defeat the dark side. There's the whole reason why George Lucas had Luke Skywalker in all black in the beginning of Return of the Jedi, and at the end, his flap open to see that light side still in there. Because it was like, oh, is he going to go to the dark side? No, he was light side all along. That was what his core is. That sort of hero journey. You need it. It's set up perfectly in the book, and it's not being set up at all in the movie. And I think that is an absolute, complete, huge mistake and a complete and utter misrepresentation and a misunderstanding of the source material. For as much as everything else that this movie was cool, and the movie was cool, I really enjoyed it. I liked it. Again, the casting was amazing. It looked good. It sounded good. A lot of the other stuff is cool that was set up. No, skimmed a little bit of the political intrigue, but a lot of the other stuff is set up. And again, I know this is the first movie, that there's going to be more. So I don't know. So maybe they're having Feyd-Rautha, they're saving him for the second movie. Maybe they tried to set up, the Baron as the big arch for the however much the series is going to go, and Raban's going to be like, this obvious real bad villain character in this first one, to set it up to maybe make it simple. And maybe they're going to bring Feyd-Rautha in for the second movie, and if there's a third or something like that. So I might be jumping the gun on my criticism of this, um, but I don't think so, because even if they have him later, not having him now, not beginning the setup process in this movie, showing the direct dark side sort of parallel between Paul and Feyd-Rautha, even in the very beginning, is a huge mistake and a huge misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the source material. That is my biggest problem. The whole thing with Dr. Yue is an issue. It was not handled well. It was skimmed. It was Cliff Notes version skimmed, which is, which again is having problems. A couple of the Harry Potter movies, especially Goblet of Fire, really, really suffered for having that skim layer, scum layer understanding. Cliff Notes, breakneck speed, sprint to the end, messed up that movie. The first attempt at a Golden Compass adaptation, the movie that had Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman in it, that should have been a really good movie. Now, again, I love the Golden Compass and the his Dark Material books. I love them; they're very good. That first movie, the one with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig and all that, was cast perfectly. I watched the first season of the show, his Dark Material show. It was well done. The acting was well done, but it was not cast as well. It's like there's some things I've noticed a lot where some things are, the actors are good actors, but they're miscast. The dude who's in Breaking Bad, who's also in his character, or his casting in the third season of Westworld was wrong. He did a very good job as an actor. He did a very good job. I'm not disputing his acting ability whatsoever. I am disputing the fact that he is not that character. He acted well, but he's miscast as that character. I forget his name. The same thing with I'm watching the second season of Another Life. Sci-fi. It's a science fiction series that's on Netflix. I started watching it because it has Katie Sackhoff in it, and I want to support, the Battlestar Galactica people, because that is a fucking amazing show. And it appears that Another Life is pretty much starting to poach people from other people from Battlestar now too. But the guy who's her husband in this, again, same thing, does a very good job acting. Completely miscast in the role. I absolutely do not believe for a second that that Katie Sackhoff's character and him would get together at all. I don't believe it. I don't believe it whatsoever. Again, he's acting very well, but still miscast. That is not what's going on in Dune. This movie was cast wonderfully. Fucking Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho was inspired. He is so goddamn good as that. I wasn't exactly sure about oh god, why am I blanking on his name right now? As Gurney. I hate that I'm blanking on his name. Dude played Thanos. Guy was in the Goonies. Him. I'm blank. I have super apologize. I was kind of like, as Gurney Halleck, really? I mean, he's a good actor, but did a great job with it. I don't remember seeing the guy who's Thufir Howard before, and when I saw him at first, I'm like, this guy's Thufir Howard? Like, I don't know, but he did a good job. I almost said Jason Isaacs, and that's not right at all. You know what? No, I gotta look this. I gotta look these up now because I. All right. As a backstory for me, um, I would have worked at the haunted house tonight, and it would have been my, I don't know, like 2 weeks straight of working literally every single day. And last night at the haunted house thing I'm working on was it was not a good night. It was just was not a good night. I've been like exhausted all day today, um, from all that, from a lot of things, and just sort of life hit me with a lot of things. But last night really drained the hell out of me. And I'm actually really hungry right now too, which if you know me is not really much of a surprise. Um, like I said, Timothy Chalamet, I haven't really seen him in that much stuff. He did a really good job as Paul. Zendaya's wonderful and great, and she looks like she's going to be a good job as Chani. Wasn't in it that much. What she was good. Javier Bardem as Stilgar was pretty badass decision. Like that was a good decision. The guy who played Jamis was really good. The guy who played Dr. Yue was really damn good and was actually pretty Oscar Isaac was pretty actually kind of did look like I sort of thought him, and he was good, but they wasted the character. Having Daddy Skarsgård Stellan as the Baron Harkonnen, great choice. You know, Oscar Isaac was really good. Like, man, because again, I know what's going to happen to him and everything like that. He was perfect as Duke Leto. There's so many people in this movie that were absolutely Josh Brolin. There we go. Thank you, IMDb. Josh Brolin was Gurney Halleck. I was like, all right, he can do it, but I don't know if it's gonna work. Like I kind of thought Gurney is almost sort of like a bard to me because he's playing. He always has the quotes. He's always playing the balisette, which he never did once. They did the quotes, but they didn't. No one said the line. One of these days, I'm gonna, catch you. They didn't have Duke Leto. I think it was Duke Leto too. They didn't have him say one of these days, Gurney, I'm gonna catch you without a quote for a situation. I'm paraphrasing slightly. They didn't have that. I was kind of looking forward to it. Um, they actually had a Sharon Duncan Brewster or something like that as Liet Kynes, which was a gender swap, but she was fabulous. Um, as it, Dave Batista as Raban was good. Everyone in this was really damn good. Um, Benjamin Clementine was the herald of the change. Came in the thing. All I gotta say right now, cheekbones. Like everyone, like even people with cheekbones, like us, I don't really have great cheekbones. It's a constant sadness in my heart. This dude's cheekbones were like definitive cheekbones. Like I couldn't stop looking at him. I was like, oh my god, like that dude's cheekbones are just amazing. Um, but yeah, Oscar Isaac. I feel really bad. I forgot his name, and Josh Brolin. Um, Villanueva. I hope I'm saying that right. Villanueva. If I'm not saying Dennis Villanueva's name right, I apologize. That's the best I can do for it right now. But again, everyone in it was really good. But just, yeah, not having Feyd-Rautha bothers me. That's my biggest, biggest issue. And I don't really feel it's a pure book nerd issue. You know, if I was nitpicking, well, still suits weren't described the way they looked. Or, ornithopters really, they should have a more rounded sort of thing. Or they say glow globes instead of, they had these wheels sort of things. And so they should actually be, a sphere of light instead of a sort of weird. They didn't really bother me. It's like, well, when they got to Arrakis, the house they went into really should have had these big wooden beams. They never really brought in the thing with the wooden beams. I can let that go. But Feod-Rautha and Doctor Yu and building Doctor Yue's treachery and having Leto kind of having him as tragic as he was, because I know it was going to happen, and knowing he's such a good guy, knowing he's such a good man, and seeing how much he did care for Jessica and did care for Paul, but seeing him be a good commander as well and a good politician like that, man, that just made him so much more tragic with that. And they did use the line, "I should have married you, Jessica," but because they sort of wrapped that bubble around the political stuff, the idea that he didn't marry her because it kind of gave other houses hope of an alliance with him, that was never really brought in. It was never really brought in that, even as Jessica observed, he had these two sides to him, like this sort of perfect man, but also this really cold sort of military commander as well. And they didn't really get into that as much, which is unfortunate because I think it maybe would have given some other depth to things as well. So, yeah, I've sort of mixed in a lot of what I sort of found favorable from some of the criticisms I have. And I've really expounded on the criticisms I have. And I know I tend to do that. It is a little bit of kind of focusing on the negative, and I think part of it is because it's almost sort of easy to say, hey, you know what, the casting was great. And, Oscar Isaac did a great job being, the military commander and the good father. And it was so nice seeing kind of the way everyone sort of cared about Paul. Jessica being real sort of hands-on and really couldn't get in with him, even though he's like, he's supposed to be 15. I don't know if they're supposed to kind of make him a little older in this. I'm not exactly sure. They never really touched on that. But having Gurney, having Duncan Idaho, having Duke Leto, all sort of make sure that they were like touching Paul, on the shoulder or hugging him. They all showed like this really healthy male influences on him. He obviously has this really, really heavy, really important feminine influence on him, and especially coming from the Bene Gesserit, it's like sort of extra feminine too, and being trained with that. And that's really clear. But he has these really healthy male contacts as well. And yes, there's a lot of because in this sort of universe now, like there's always the feints within feints within feints. They have all these problems with poisonings and assassinations, and there's danger lurking for these people at like every corner. Like even drilling into him, you can't even stand with your back to the door. They have these little hunter seeker robots that could kill you with his needle and all this other stuff. They're almost in constant danger, and even though he's been trained for like combat and to kill and all these other things and to lead and everything as well, the relationships are still really healthy. So and they showed that, and it was really nice to see that even though yes, you were trained to kill and trained to fight and trained to lead and armies and all this other stuff, there was still like a healthy relationship between Paul and these other people, and that was really nice to see as well. Man, honestly, like yeah, Jason Momoa was just such a damn perfect. That's like the one of the main castings in this. There's a few of them. Oscar Isaac as Duke Leto. Timothy Chalamet's turning out to be that too. That were like a dead on perfect casting for it. I know Rebecca Ferguson's a good actress. She's not, again, it's one of those things where it's like it's hard to separate what I've had in my imagination for it. She doesn't really look like I thought Jessica would look, especially since they made such a thing about her hair being bronze. It's almost like in The Witcher, the woman they have for Triss, and I think I understand a certain amount of, making sure that in this sort of clearly European setting, there's representation. There's a whole big thing about Triss's hair and how red it is and how proud she was for that. And they bring up a lot of the times of Jessica's hair being bronze, and Rebecca Ferguson doesn't really have that. They didn't do that to her hair, and she is very striking, and she's got very striking features, and it's obviously very attractive, but not didn't seem like it would be Jessica. But she did an amazing job. She was perfect. She was perfect as that. The combination of worried and then sometimes, especially during the Gom Jabbar, almost tortured sort of mother, and sort of caring, wife almost, even though she technically wasn't, but still wife, but also like a, very strong, very disciplined, can get through these sort of things. And as she's repeating like the litany of fear, going through that, and you can actually see her. She does such an amazing job acting because it's like as she's reciting the litany of fear, you see her going through the stages and then coming out the other side, and only she remains. She did an amazing job with that. And there's a one point in time where you just kind of see Timothy Chalamet do almost the same sort of thing as his mother is repeating the litany of fear. You see him go through the same thing as well when they're in the ornithopter riding into the storm at the end, towards the end. Um, but so she sold me on herself being Jessica, even though again I don't know if I would cast her for that. But so it was really good. Like again, I love the book. It's one of my all-time favorite, and I have a bad time about being able to say, hey, this is my favorite thing with this, or building a top five list of things or anything. But Dune is definitely up there in the number in my favorite books. And I know there's a lot. I personally know several people who have read way more books than me, but I have read a not insignificant number of books, and Dune is definitely up there. Silmarillion, maybe a little higher, but Dune is definitely up there. But it again, so if you're definitely go see it in a theater. It's a definitely experience you should have in a cinema. Screw streaming stuff. Screw first level streaming. I wish I had um, the resources, the finances, the money to be able to see Black Widow in a theater, because I would have liked to have supported seeing that in the cinema. As opposed, I haven't seen it at all. I haven't paid for it at all, or anything. I will eventually because I do want to see it, but I wanted to see it in the theater to be able to support seeing it in the cinema and everything else like that. But definitely, like this is the sort of movie that seeing movies in a cinema was made for. Like you don't, man, you see Star Wars movies in a theater. You see Steven Spielberg movies or cinema. I guess because I do because I've done stage acting and stuff. I want to kind of separate that. There are some things that you see in a frickin' cinema. That James Cameron Avatar movie. You definitely needed to see that in the cinema, even if you didn't see the 3D version, which you should have. Again, not a world-beating movie. Like there's nothing new to that movie, but the spectacle of seeing it in the cinema was good. So Dune is definitely a movie. It's a book that if you're going to make an adaptation, this the positive thing about it being a movie series and not like an HBO or Amazon Prime series or something like that, or Netflix or whatever. The benefit of that is because the scope is so massive in terms of the way it's written and everything else like that. having that cinematic experience is better. Um, the sweeping sort of breadth of the differences in the planets involved, the visceral experience of the way they made it with the sandworms, the idea of like that sort of sweeping emptiness of Arrakis, the water of Caladan, the sort of cold, like evil feeling of Getty Prime. All that sort of stuff, the architecture and the sets and even the combat with it. Yeah, having that on a big screen is definitely nice. Um, it looked fabulous, and it looked fabulous in a sort of realistic sort of way, where it wasn't sort of like a fantasy sci-fi, which this could easily be, given the sort of religious sort of connotations to things, the sort of prescience and everything. There could be a little fantasy tint to this too, and especially if you're sort of a fan of some of like the old like Sinbad sort of movies or something like that too, having it in the desert. Excuse me again. Riveting, uh, riveting videos and auditory experiences there. But it's you could easily sort of make a sort of fantasy sort of feel to this to it, but they didn't. The sci-fi stuff was realistic. It wasn't blatantly science fiction. It seemed like okay, yes, because this is what it is. 10,000 years or 8,000 years from now, or whatever it is, that's when this is like happening. So you could realistically see a lot of this stuff being things that would happen thousands of years from now. And there, in some things, maybe a little bit too analog, like in the controls of the ornithopter and stuff like that, or maybe a little too analog to current helicopter technology. But I sort of grounded it a little bit in a sort of realism. So even though these are taking place on all these other planets with all this technology and all these people who can do these wonderful things that we can't do now, mentats, they got rid of computer. There's a whole thing in the book, whole thing in the mythology where we got rid of computers because there's a whole war that went on with this like that. So we got rid of computers and trained people, these mentats, to be human computers, and through for Howard and Potter Devers for the Harkonnens, for the Atreides and the Harkonnens respectively. There we go. Were these mentats, and that's the thing. Like Peter Devers wasn't developed as a character at all. He was sort of there and creepy looking. Was obviously someone who was in with the Baron Harkonnen, but wasn't developed as a mentat. Wasn't developed as a character who had these flaws that the Baron, even though this person was so trained to be this human computer, had these flaws that the Baron was manipulating so much. None of that at all. Completely none of that. He was just sort of like this creepy figure who was this, henchman, which I didn't even think of till right now, which is it's kind of a bummer because, that would have been an interesting thing to do and play with as well for, it's not in the whole thing. And he would have been out in this movie anyway, but it would have been interesting to see. And maybe a little necessary in terms of again setting up parallels between Leto, Duke Leto Atreides and Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, setting up those parallels, setting up the parallels between Thufir Hawat and Piter de Vers, and then later if they do with the book, how that kind of works out and everything too. Um, Man, they really made sure Duncan Idaho had. I can spoil something here, um, but made his death look and everything. It was badass. And the fighting was cool. The fighting was realistic. There was fighting where it really looked like the actual actors were actually fighting, as opposed to shaky cam and quick cuts, a la like all the Marvel movies up till now, where you can't really tell who's doing what and you're getting seasick. But yeah, it looked like people were actually doing the fighting. The fighting was pretty realistic in a lot of ways. It actually almost sort of looked like a Kali Eskrima sort of thing with like the knives and everything, which was cool because I love that stuff. This stuff is badass. So it was nice to see that at least seem represented. Yeah, so I mean, cinematographically was brilliant, and obviously if the actors are doing a really good job, part of that is the director, because as we know, also talking about Star Wars, you can have really good, you know, performers have a really bad performance because the director's not helping them. I've had that myself in my life. And as much and I've also had a director say, "Well, it's you guys out there, not me. So if you're bad, blah 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 blah." I was like, "Oh, okay." Well, that was also coming from someone with a very blatant and very sort of horrible abusive personality disorder, to a bunch of 18-year-olds, and I didn't buy it because I'm like, "Well, no, you're the director. It's your vision up there. So if this doesn't go well, it's kind of going to look bad on you too." Boy, that was a trip. Anyway, so obviously, like, as a director, he's doing an amazing job. Again, there's just some choices that harm the overall product and show, and quite frankly, show a certain lack of understanding of the source material and things, and even sometimes just in terms of a way that will help people understand and really get into the story. Overall, though, and the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm psyching myself up for the movie. So don't get me wrong, I loved it. You know, yeah, because let's just go through stuff like, okay, we'll break this down. Sand, the sound, sand. So, well, there's a lot of sand, but the sound, the music stuff fit, um, and even the stuff with the worms and everything like that. You could feel it, and it was good. It looked good. It sounded good. Um, the costumes and sets, I mean, were brilliant. They gave a humanness to things, but also a sense of alienness, a sense of, again, the grandiosity and the idea that what's being played around with are really big things. One of the cool things about Dune, and I think they did this in the movie, was that the concepts are very huge, whether it's political in terms of things happening across a whole planet or across, what they call like the known universe, because humans are spread out all over the damn place at this point in time. So the political ramifications are massive. The messianic ramifications not only are equally massive because, again, not only for a planet, but for this whole order, the Bene Gesserit, that have been steering and manipulating things for this universe for hundreds or even thousands of years, and then what's eventually going to be for a whole universe as well. But all these things are happening in the context of individual people living these extraordinary lives, but still being human beings and people with it. And they did that with the movie, I feel. But that also shows that they have an understanding of the source material, and there's a lot of stuff in there that's very hard to do because there's a lot of stuff in it that is the individual character's thoughts. You can't really translate that very well in movies. A little bit better probably in shows, but not really in movies. And they were able to bring in some of his the idea of he's having these visions and how to rectify them. And then they started getting grander and bigger. And yeah, the whole sort of thing sweeping the universe under his name, his banner, they started bringing that out. And so it's got these big sweeping things, but these individual people dealing with them. And even in these different stages of life, dealing with them as well. And they kind of showed it was nice to see, the whole thing with him and Chani wasn't just, oh, two lovesick teenagers seeing each other at sight and everything. It's like, no, sort of like, the meeting where she's kind of like, I got the drop on you, even though all this other stuff is going on, and helping him out a little bit in the fight. Not as much as the book, but a little bit. And sort of like, well, this guy's going to die, so I'm not really going to get too attached to him. And then the fact that he didn't, the fact that he beat an adult Fremen as a teenager, her, roughly her age, so her peer, something that she wouldn't be able to do is like, oh, well, oh, there's a different respect, and having them welcomed into their sort of people kind of gave a whole other thing. So you saw the change, even in a relatively short time, you saw a change and a sort of little character arc even with that. So all those things are really well done. Casting was amazing, the acting was amazing, everything else was amazing. There's certain just things with the story that really sort of catch my craw a little bit. It's not like, some of the Lord of the Rings stuff where it's like, well, you know what? This really between Bilbo giving up the ring and leaving the Shire, and then eventually Frodo taking up the thing and leaving the Shire. There's years going between, not a little bit of time and then some rush, and then some characters were kind of taken out and everything. It's not like that where a lot of these decisions were clearly made to be able to bring people in and keep it moving because we're trying to do this in a movie. It just seems like I understand a lot of decisions made for things like Lord of the Rings. I might not agree with all of them, but it really does kind of make sense. I'd love to see Tom Bombadil in that original Lord of the Rings series. I'd love to see Tom Bombadil. It does make sense that he's not in it, though. It's unfortunate, but it makes sense. And it makes sense also with the idea of trying to keep some of the themes and trying to keep some of the stuff from the original source material going along a certain way. But with this, the mistakes are much more to the quick of that DNA of the source material in the movie. So some things might be rectified in the other movies. I don't know. They might get into the whole thing with how amazing it was that Yue was this traitor. I hope they're able to bring in more with Jessica being able to be so savvy with how she talks to people and deals with them without using the voice, without, you know, all that other stuff, just like her mind and her words. And I do hope that, okay, they didn't have Feyd-Rautha in this movie, but I hope they have him in the next one. And I hope they're able to course correct and make up for the mistake of not having him in the first one. I hope they're able to do that. I hope they do. And again, I understand based in the first movie, but overall, if you've never read the book, I don't think that it will hinder you from understanding the movie. If you had read the book, I don't think that'll hinder you from enjoying the movie. I enjoyed it immensely. I was really captivated by it and invested in the movie. Even when I figured the glaring mistakes, it didn't blow me out of the water. I could still stay involved in the movie, and I was captivated with it throughout the whole thing. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to owning it. And I really hope that there's an extended edition. I don't know. I haven't really. I tried to make sure I wasn't going to look things up. I tried to stay away from everything about this movie for as long as I could because I didn't want to get my hopes up because I was really afraid it was going to suck or it was going to let me down. And it didn't. Didn't let me down at all. Didn't suck. It was really good. Enjoyed it. Go watch it. Read the book, then watch it if you've never read the book before. If you had read the book before, I don't know, read it again. What the hell? It's not going to hurt. And then watch it. It was really good. I'm trying to get some friends of mine who've never read the book to see it. But damn. Okay. I got to wrap this up. I'm repeating myself too damn much. Repeating myself too damn much. Uh, Thank you for watching and listening and all that other stuff. And I hope you enjoy the movie too. And thank you.